How are you guys? Today we're going to talk about the IJNLF, the Imperial Japanese Naval Landing Forces, and first off we're going to talk about my big mistake. Now here we see the naval depot. Now thanks to my new mate Austin, who kindly posted pictures of his personal photographs on YouTube for me to view. Thank you very much, Austin. This building is on the same block as the old building. The old building would include these walls, this side, and this side. The far corner was rebuilt. Where I went wrong with this building was when I had read accounts of the Battle of Shanghai, the naval depot was constantly referred to as being reinforced, and it was reinforced with concrete to a depth of over 1 meter in some places after the 1932 battle. So the building, luckily enough for me, the height of the building is the same. So I just, for observation purposes, I just pretended that the far walls don't exist. In actual fact, it was a brick compound with a single skin brick wall about 4 foot high running all the way around it, and an open parade ground in the middle, which also explains why when they were forming up, the men of the IJNLF were already under small arms sniper fire. Now here we see my interpretation of the forces of the IJNLF for the 1932 Battle of Shanghai. Now, there are quite a few accounts of this battle and the IJNLF troops involved. Now, first of all, I'd like to say categorically that the Special Naval Landing Forces were established in October 1932 as a direct consequence of this battle. So if you are reading accounts of the Special Naval Landing Forces in the First Battle of Shanghai, again you are coming across a reference where somebody has crossed, has just got confused between the two battles. Now, it was with great trepidation that the Japanese Navy approached the subject of Marines. We have to understand that the Imperial Japanese Navy was set up along lines of the Royal Navy. And on the Royal Navy, on every ship, there are Royal Marines. But the Japanese Navy was wary because it was having a long look at the American Navy too. It was very wary of perhaps giving birth to another service. And so was the Army. Even though the Army was very much into amphibious operations by 1937, in fact, the Army was probably ahead of the Navy by 28 in terms of its approach to amphibious warfare. But even the Army didn't want to name its troops that were amphibious Marines. Neither the Navy nor the Army wanted to encourage a third service arm to be formed under the flag of Japan. So when we read accounts, and many do say Japanese Marines, we have to be very, very wary, because in all accounts that I personally have read, Japanese sailors could volunteer or could be assigned to have infantry training, in which case they were awarded a blue tunic, or as they are always termed in translations, blue jackets. Now, blue jackets is a tunic a sailor who was a part of the crew would put on for shore duties as infantry. And I'll give you an example of this. So a gunboat flotilla of 10 gunboats, a mothership, and perhaps a float plane tender could muster. Sorry, I got confused. A cruiser could muster 92 men, and a flotilla could muster 180 men. So when we look at a cruiser and it's got a crew of 1200, 90 of them, and that would be the officers to command them, could be termed as blue jackets. So those are men who've undergone infantry training. They're called to shore duties. They pull their helmet out. They have the special gear. They put on their blue tunic, their blue jacket, and they fight as infantry. So even a gunboat flotilla, when it came to trained infantry, could provide 120 men. So then when we look at the forces of the IJNLF involved in the Battle of Shanghai in 1932, we have to look at the Japanese forces not only by their written down organizations, but by looking at the photographs and remembering that the sailors that are trained as Marines are in blue tunics, and generally they're carrying the carbine version of the Arisaka rifle. When you look at the photographic evidence, you will see that the sailors fighting as infantry in the first battle of Shanghai are a mixed bunch, and some are not wearing helmets. In fact, a fair majority aren't wearing helmets because they just have never been issued one. The helmets the Japanese Navy are wearing for this battle, the IJNLF, is the Blossom type, and it's in a dark green. For the second battle of Shanghai, they wear the later version of helmet, not the Blossom type, but the color of it is a yellowy ochre color. Now, these are my forces for the Battle of Shanghai in 32, and I want to say very first off, I painted them the wrong color because I used these forces for the Battle of 37 Shanghai. For the Battle of 32, you should have your vehicles in the Japanese ochre color, the mustardy brown color. Now, a company of the SNLF could vary between 75 to 90 men. 4 companies made up a battalion. The battalion would have 4 medium machine guns as support. What those medium machine guns could be during the first Battle of Shanghai are the Type 3 or tripod mounted for sustained fire Japanese versions of the Lewis gun. I think it's a Type 92. Anyway, they are a Navy weapon, so it's quite right to have Lewis gun type weapons in your Japanese naval infantry, among Japanese naval infantry. And it's also quite right to remember that those weapons could be in 6.5 or 303. And some reports will say they're in 7.72. I know I'm going to contradict a lot of things here, so I may as well throw in the 303. Yes, the Japanese Navy used 303. They were still manufacturing 303 ammunition up until the end of the war. And even though a lot of books would contradict me on that, a lot of the newer editions, and I try to keep my research relevant, academically relevant, will prove me right if you read them. So we'll get back to the Imperial Japanese Naval Infantry on the afternoon of the 28th of January 1932. Now, at 9:30 on the previous night of the battle, the Japanese had talked to the British military, to the military forces of the settlement, of the international settlement, and made it known that they were going to attack at 6:30 the following afternoon. And when the IJNLF attacked at 6:30 afternoon, they found the street empty. The police stations had none of the Chinese policemen had turned up to work. The whole city knew they were coming, and we know that the 19th Army under General Kai knew they were coming, and that's why he'd made sure to infiltrate the city with plenty of snipers. So when we look again at the IJNLF on that day, what we're looking at is a force that has been radically watered down, with normal sailors who've been issued a rifle, never had infantry training, may have shot a few rounds at the range, in their basic training, and that's it. When you couple that to the fact that there aren't many officers who've had the basic, who've passed through a military academy, and the size of the operation that the Japanese are about to launch, we'll see that, as I said previously, they have made a lot, they've underestimated a lot of things. Now, before I get on about the IJNLF, I'd like to say that the base colour, of the figure of these bases, I'm going to change. It's just far too pale. Okay. So as I said, a company of naval landing forces could be 70 to 90 men, 75 to 90 men. 4 medium machine guns. An officer would lead with not much of in the way of a HQ, 4 or 5 men, not much in the HQ at all, because the commander, the idea is that the commander of the ship tells them what to do, they go ashore and do it. There's not much flexibility in the Japanese command structure for junior officers. So I gave these troops Type 3s, or as I said, Japanese versions of the Lewis gun. Now, the guns that I looked at, look, you're going to read a lot of accounts of the fighting in 1932 in Shanghai, and I promise you one thing: every time you see naval infantry sailors manning a gun, the caption underneath will tell you Type 41, Type 41, Type 41. Well, this is what I said about photographic analysis earlier. You need to look at the pictures, because the Type 41 has a recoil chamber under the barrel, and none of the guns captioned as Type 41s in any of the pictures that I've seen are in fact Type 41s. What they are, and here as I said before, I'm willing to be wrong plenty of times, but these guns are, or were, I believe, and again I said believe, were Elswick guns, 3.5 pounder short Elswick guns taken off Japanese naval ships. These guns were in service with the Japanese Navy, and they were mounted on the old 70 centimeter howitzer carriage. I had thought that they actually were the old 77 centimeter guns, but no, they were still in service, but only for ceremonial purposes. So they are, as far as I can see and I could deduce, they are indeed the 3.5 pounder short Elswick guns made in the UK. Now, if anybody wants to contradict me on that, great, send a picture that matches. And you know what, you can all do it. You can all do it, because I'd love you to go as crazy as I did looking at how many types of howitzer there were around in those days that matches the picture of the carriage and the gun on top, because Hotchkiss was so big on mountain guns, everything looks like mountain guns. There was crook guns that I looked at, but eventually I settled on Elswick guns, and if you guys can contradict me with 2 pictures that correlate that, I'll change my mind. So I just made the guns as close as I could to the actual pictures that I had seen and I could see, and I was happy enough with that. Now, the armoured cars. I have been wrong. I had always thought that the Sumida Model P was the armoured car of the IJNLF in Shanghai 37. And the reason for this is pretty simple. For Shanghai 32, sorry. And the reason for this is pretty simple because all the photos said, and all the graphics said that it only served the Navy. And it doesn't look too dissimilar to the Somo Sumida. So I just got the two confused. So my Sumida Model P that I built will be posing as a Somo Sumida. But at least I got the other armoured cars right, two Vickers Crossleys. So on the afternoon of the 28th of January, when the Japanese headed in two groups of 1,500 plus armoured support, plus armoured car support and light guns, headed to take Tiongtangan Station and retake North Station. This is what half of their force would have looked like, you know, at the scale of a wargamer. Now, I don't want to mention the wargame that I play because I've gone so far, I diverged so far away from it in the rules that I use. I want this channel to be for every wargamer. So, when you look at a company of the IJNLF at 75 men, each platoon is 25 men, and then 3 platoons, you know, and plus the officers that command it. So, it's not structurally with firepower a very flexible unit for the war games table. You're gonna have to nurse these figures up the table. A brigade of the IJNLF was 4 battalions. So to raise 3,000 fighting soldiers, you know, fighting feet on the ground with rifles in their hands, from the 7,000 personnel that are in Shanghai sounds simple enough. But in fact, when you look at the 7,000 naval personnel in Shanghai and the size of the city, you have to remember that the 7,000 includes ships that have to have work to do on the waters of the Yangtze and the other rivers. So they're on ration strength of 7,000, but the Japanese Navy was scraping the ground on that morning to come up with 3,000 troops for this operation. They had also enrolled 500 civilians into a naval reserve regiment, but they were found to be so incompetent and so one-sided in the way that they wanted the troops to behave. They were more interested in the troops burning down their opposite members or people's houses who they owed money to, than telling the troops, you know, the best way to get from A to Z, because Shanghai is a maze of alleys. And the main thoroughfares, as you can see in my previous videos, they're pretty open to fire from the 19 Tommy, even if it might be at range of 500 meters. And the alleys are mazes, and they're full of snipers. So the IJNLF, when it set off that afternoon, with air support and the ship's fire support, you know, you should still have been able to displace the men of the 19th Army from their positions, because the Japanese did have superior firepower. They do have control of the air this day. We'll get later into the air battle over Shanghai. But the reason they lose is because the snipers unnerve the officers, and the snipers unnerve the men. The men of the 19th Route Army, their opposition number, they're resolute troops. You know, by the end of the battle, all the way through this battle, And this battle begins because the Japanese keep demanding that the 19th Route Army withdraw 12 miles from the city limits. And the 19th Route Army keeps ignoring that. Now when we get to the end of this battle, on the 30th of March, for the end of the fighting anyway, it was a leap year, so the 29th of, by the time we get to the end of this battle, at the end of March, beginning of April, in the leap year that it was, the Japanese issue one more order, like, we will annihilate you in the morning, you have to withdraw 12 miles from the city, and they launched their attack early. You know, they gave the Chinese fair warning, and the Chinese had totally withdrawn. So the line of the Shanghai-Wusan line, even though some strong points did fall during the engagement, it was an intact line, and it is a tribute to the 19th Army that they could disengage from an enemy with such a large force and move such a long way without the enemy having any idea they did it. You know, fair play to the men of the 19th Army. I think any commander would have been proud to command those troops. And that was another thing. During the battle, the 19th Army changes. When we see the 19th Army, I know this is a video by the IJNLF, but I'm just going to have a waffle and enjoy it. When we look at pictures of the 19th Army at the beginning, we're going to see a lot of service caps. But after this first day of fighting, this first big engagement, the people of Shanghai start to change their, you know, because as I said, most times a Chinese army, a warlord army had come to Shanghai, it was bad news. But these were troops that were behaving well, and they had given the Japanese a bloody nose. So within hours of the fighting stopping, parcels are starting to arrive and gifts. And Shanghai has a huge textile industry. And within a week or so, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the army has changed its uniforms. And this is because the 19th Route Army has been taken into the bosom of the citizens of Shanghai, and they are donating funds. And you see, it's still cold. There's frost on the ground during this battle, you know, when this battle starts, the 29th. And these men are in light cotton uniforms. And the people are watching this, but they're not really impressed by Chinese soldiers. But when the victory comes, you know, when they force the Japanese army back, when the Japanese army can't break their line, the people start to think, oh, and these are Chinese soldiers. Is this how they can be? Well, they should be better equipped, and they shouldn't be cold. And the ladies of Shanghai, you know, the middle class ladies and the rich ladies of Shanghai, raised money, and these troops are soon wearing new uniforms. They've got new slippers, and the uniforms are a field cap and a long jacket, like a long overcoat, which is something rare for Chinese forces. You don't see usually Chinese forces in long coats. Anyway, so that was just getting away from the IJNLF and just telling you that the 19th Army was the beginning of people starting to love, or starting to, like, for the first time, respect Chinese soldiers. After the Battle of Shanghai, the Chinese have a saying: you don't use good iron for nails, and what they mean is good men don't become soldiers. But after the first Battle of Shanghai, people with good education start to join the army. You know, young men with prospects will join the army, and that's something that in China had never happened before. So anyway, let's go back to the IJNLF. So 1,500 men, about a dozen armoured cars. Look, the armoured cars could have been as little as 8 and could have been as high as 16. And what I mean by that is how they were divided. You know, I'm just talking, this is just a section for Tian, Tong'an. And these are the right armoured cars for the battle. But as for the numbers involved, could be anywhere in the total battle in this first engagement, because remember, there are forces heading to North Station down North Sichuan Road. I doubt the Japanese had more than 28 armoured cars available. So to say that this column that this force attacking Tiantanmen had about 14 armoured cars. I'd say that's about right. You know, I don't know how the commander on the day divided his forces. Armoured car wise anyway. And I know that 1,500 men plus the reserve infantry moved forward at Tiantanmen station. So the IJNLF, 75 men to a company, 320, 330 to a battalion, 2 battalions a regiment, 4 battalions a brigade, again with Elswick 3.5 pounder gun, some meter armoured car, thickest across the armoured cars. It was going to be a tough battle, as I said. The Japanese Navy will get a bloody nose here, and the Japanese Navy will get a bloody nose here, and the Army will be here within a few days. And the Army will operate. You'll see the Army operating it, and photos will tell you it's Shanghai, and indeed it is, but it's not this section of Shanghai. The Army will be attacking in the boundaries of the old city, and they'll be attacking around Qiangji, and I'll get to that in a later video because I want to do the landings at Qiangji. Now, I hope I've helped you understand here a little bit about the IJNLF. That for this battle, they were a very watered down infantry force, expertise wise. The SNLF would be a product of this battle. The Special Naval Landing Forces would be a product of this battle. Now, I'm not going to say that means that the Japanese stopped using their naval infantry like this, because indeed they used naval infantry throughout the war, but we must be careful, as I said, about using the term marine. I'll give you an example. So the Special Naval Landing Force would have landing craft. IJNLF would be using the ship's boats to row ashore. You know, or if they were coming off a gunboat, they would just moor and the troops would go ashore. So this is, and the Japanese, with the first Battle of Wake, when Devereux made his great standard Wake, they would have been blue jackets and sailors, and they would have been rowing to the battle. They wouldn't have been in landing craft. They were in rowboats. So the Japanese Navy learnt a lot from the first Battle of Shanghai, but there was a lot it didn't learn. You know, approaching the shore in rowboats in the modern age against a defended position was just stupidity. You know. They developed the SNLF so they would never have to do things like that again, but their conquest of the Pacific sometimes got a bit too arrogant, and just like they were on this night, they were just too arrogant, and they underestimated so many things. Also, I want to talk about the rear areas. You got to understand, when these 3,000 troops, as I said, they were the most the Japanese could scrape together. There's the rear areas behind Q, which borders the Wampu River, and the Japanese fleet's based in the Wampu River. And as this battle progresses, the Japanese never ever managed to really sort out the snipers in their rear, and with the Chinese unable to reply to the Chinese ships with their own artillery, because they have very little artillery, and Japanese ships many times are moored among foreign battleships. It is often the case that during this battle, naval bombardments by ships are interrupted by sniper fire and infantry fire from the shore. Now, because these are engagements in the Japanese rear, and these are engagements, like some of them are on March 13th, cruisers firing in support, and it comes under rifle fire, then it comes under machine gun fire, And the fire is so intense and so incessant that it abandoned its support role and starts firing directly with its main guns at the buildings on the shore opposite. So sometimes Japanese naval bombardment wasn't successful because of infantry intervention, and the infantry intervention in this case has to be that it's not really infantry. It's the Green Gang. It's Brigadier Do. A lot of this rear activity of the snipers at the beginning, at the beginning of the battle on the 28th. Yes, there are a lot of Song's troops as snipers, but as the battle progresses and you see more organisation in this, you have to give it that it's Big Do and the Green Gang. Because as I said, there's a lot of wars going on here. General Kai's come to Shanghai because if he can retake Shanghai, he's going to be able to get a lot of graft out of this city. And if the Green Gang can help chase the Japs out, they're going to have new territory to carve up, and they'll both be helping each other, and they'll both be working for China. So I hope that helps. Look, just a little bit more about the figures. They're from Redbox. I had to carve them up. I made the machine guns myself. I made the field guns myself from bits in the light guns myself. The Ellswick guns from bits in the spares box and a little bit of chop. Made the Samita myself, and the IJNLF. As I said, I will use these for the second battle of Shanghai. I'll add a few more armor cars and bits and pieces because I've got all the kit for that. But this is what they had on the night of the 28th and the daylight and up until the evening of the 29th for the first battle of Shanghai on the Wusong-Shanghai rail line in 1932. Okay, if you like that, please press and subscribe. Press like and subscribe. I'm going to go now. Always remember, the Chinese soldier fought with the least for the longest. Take care.